Okay, we are back for week 3 of A Course in Miracles. I'm a day late, but better late than never. Just like last week, I'm not focusing on every lesson. I'm just going to be focusing on the lessons that had the most impact on me. So this week, we're going to be talking about lesson 9, lesson 10, and lesson 15. So let's start with lesson 9. I see nothing as it is now. The exercise for this lesson was to look around wherever you were, outside, inside, and to start to just name the things that you see and recognize that you're not seeing them as they are now. And the idea here is to get you to understand that our perception of reality is a bit limited. In, I think it was lesson 8, they talk about how your perception of any given item is fully based on your limited lived experience. So we know purely scientifically, for example, the way that I might be seeing the color green is going to be dependent on all the greens I've ever seen in my life. Even though we can all agree that we're looking at green, we're not all exactly seeing that green in the same way. And I think on a deeper level, also scientifically speaking, we already know as human beings, we're limited to whatever we can see based on the wavelength of light. So there's things that animals can see. I know snakes can see like infrared. Like there's just things that are in existence. They're part of our reality, but we literally do not see them. And so I like the introduction of this thought when they're trying to do the reprogramming of how we experience reality. I did like the idea that I could kind of find peace in the understanding that I'm developing thoughts that are based on a reality that I cannot fully perceive. That leaves room, right? It leaves room for me to imagine or consider new ideas or new concepts or new ways of seeing the world and developing new ways of seeing the world, which I think is the basis of all good scientific discovery. We think about these great minds that existed before us who helped us develop things like electricity and math and physics and all these things that right now seem so abstract to our lived daily experience, but really they came from the people who were looking around and saying like, well, what is that? What am I perceiving? What am I perceiving? And am I actually seeing it as it is now? And then I got to lesson 10, which kind of seemed a bit in contradiction with the final thought that I had come to, which is like, wow, how brilliant are our minds when we are thinking about things. Lesson 10 was, my thoughts do not mean anything. Lesson 10 starts by saying, now we are emphasizing that the presence of these thoughts means that you are not thinking. This is merely another way of repeating our earlier statement that your mind is really blank. And I had to actually take a moment and think, what do they mean when we're thinking our minds are really blank? And what I wrote down is, okay, so when we are thinking, we are not actually being present with reality. Being present with reality is actually a deeply meditative state where the mind is not lost in time, but making use of time. You unlock a channel to the divine, and we call this a flow state, which assists with making reality clearer. And thinking without action is just nothingness, and too much of it will throw you into psychosis after a time. This is why we love to read, to create, to imagine, to take action with thought, which is creativity. And that is very different from thinking. The act of thinking, the best action you can take is just thinking about what you want to do with the thought, not the thoughts themselves. And so what I'm rediscovering is that the best use of my thinking is to figure out what action needs to be taken from the thought and then do that. The act of thinking for thinking's sake is absolutely useless to us. And they go on to say in the text that the basic decision of the miracle-minded is not to wait on time any longer than is necessary. Time can waste as well as be wasted. So the exercise of chapter 10 was then to go through your entire mind and identify every thought and say, my thoughts about blank do not mean anything. And once I had declared that they didn't mean anything, it actually kind of freed up my mind. My takeaway from this lesson was, if I find myself overthinking, I need to consider if I'm just waiting on time and wasting it versus using my mind as a source of creation, which is action. So the idea here is if you can work through the idea that the thoughts are actually nothing, right? Because if you're thinking about something in the future or the past. Thinking for thinking's sake gets you nothing, gets you nowhere. Every thought has to be accompanied by action. So if we want to make this practical, I think about how when I'm worried or I'm thinking about if I have enough time to get things done, instead of thinking about if I have enough time to get things done, I pull out my calendar and I say, okay, let's look realistically. with the thoughts that I'm having, what would it take for me to get this done? What has to be prioritized? What has to be rearranged? What can I no longer keep doing in order to give myself the time that I need to do XYZ? And I think that's a perfect example of the thoughts leading to nothingness, which is the act of feeling so overwhelmed by what needs to happen next that you paralyze yourself or delay yourself and waste time, or the act of thinking that promotes action. You say, okay, if I'm thinking about the future, how do I map it out? How do I plan for it? How do I prepare myself for it? And if I'm thinking about the past, who do I need to speak to? What do I need to do to resolve this? What do I need to learn in order to change this thing from the past that's affecting me in the present? These are the ways that thoughts can have meaning, but the way we've been taught to think, most of us, our thoughts really don't mean anything. And then the last lesson was lesson 15, which ties perfectly into lesson 10. My thoughts are images that I have made. In lesson 14, which I didn't go into depth about, but I'll reference something that they said in there, which was the world you see has nothing to do with reality. It is of your own making and it does not exist. And then this goes on to tie into what is written in lesson 15, which says, it is because the thoughts you think appear as images that you do not recognize them as nothing. You think them. And you think you see them. This is how your seeing was made. This is the function you have given your body's eyes. It is not seeing, it is image making. That ate me up. I'm not going to lie. The idea of thinking of thoughts as image making and then thinking about imagination, and I've talked about this a lot in my previous podcast about how I think worry and fear is imagination gone wrong. I feel very affirmed in that belief system after having read this and doing this exercise. The exercise was to go through all of your thoughts in your mind and say, this blank is an image that I have made. Your thoughts are creating your lived experience. And I feel like I get to experience this on a firsthand basis than more often than most people do because I have terrible vision. I'm wearing contacts right now, but when I take off my glasses and then I wake up in the morning, everything's blurry. And sometimes if I haven't properly looked at something the night before, I might look at it in the morning and be wondering what that thing is because my thoughts are trying to connect what I'm seeing to my understanding. But if I didn't look at it clearly the day before and then I wake up and I don't have my glasses near me and I'm looking up trying to figure out what it is, it's completely blurry. I am subject to whatever my brain decides that thing is going to be until I put my glasses on, which that vision assisting tool now helps clarify my version of reality. And so I was meditating on this exercise and I wrote down that this applies to what I existed and what I've manifested. And I think about how when I question in moments where I felt lack or without resources, how did my belief about the situation hinder what I attempted to experience? How did it change who I spoke to, how I carried myself, how I planned my time? Did I plan based on worst case scenarios, or did I take action based on an image of mine that is connected to my ultimate purpose on earth? And now that I know my thoughts are images that I'm making, how does that change what I allow myself to imagine and how I redirect my distorted imagination? So that's kind of where I ended up for lesson 15. I feel really good about what's unfolding in me as I get deeper and deeper into these lessons. I think by the end of this month, I'm already doing a bit of case studying, which I've talked to some of my friends about this. I'm a big fan of case studying new belief systems. And I've already I believe I'm experiencing some reality shifts as a result of me continuing to integrate these concepts. And I'll end this with a quote that I heard a few years ago, which I suspect is from this book, to be honest, but I haven't gotten to that chapter yet, so I guess I'll find out. I'm not going to look it up, but it's a quote I heard during a course that I took, a spiritual course, where she said, "The purpose of my mind is not to solve problems. The purpose of my mind is to attune to the divine mind, which is where all solutions come from." And I feel like that is the end result of this course. So we'll see what happens. Because as I find myself throwing away my version of what I think is happening, I can hear a lot clearer what needs to happen next. And I think that that's making things a bit easier. So we'll see. We'll see what happens and what comes forth. And I'll see you next week.